So we are here to talk about FOIA, everyone, the Freedom of Information Act. I'm Alicia Wallace. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the director at Equality Bahamas, where we promote women's and LGBTQI plus people's rights as human rights. And I am here for a conversation with Matt Aubry from ORG. Matt, tell us a little bit about ORG and what you do.
Sure. I'm the executive director at the Organization for Responsible Governance. We're a Bahamian not-for-profit, working at really promoting good governance, primarily through the engagement of citizens and the private sector and civil society so that they can interplay, sometimes complement, often counterbalance government. And when that happens, our vision really is that that's when we start to foster more inclusive and more sustainable social and economic development. As an archipelago, there's a lot of communities that unfortunately don't get brought into the conversations that they need to be. And so our goal is really to make sure that everyone has the access and opportunity so that they can not just survive, but move towards thriving.
Cool. And I know that from the very beginning, from when I was first introduced to ORG, there has been this focus on the Freedom of Information Act. And I kind of think of FOIA when I think about ORG. When I think about ORG, I think about FOIA. Can you tell us why this has been so central to the work that ORG has been doing over the years?
Sure. When ORG was started, which is now 10 years ago, FOIA was really in our headlights. We were coming right off of the first value-added tax that was put into the Bahamas, and the folks that were from the private sector and civil society that were advocating to make sure that it was appropriate and that it actually achieved what it was intended, which was bringing down our significant level of national debt. Also, we're understanding that there was a need for laws that created transparent opportunities for citizens to know how the monies that have been put forward through their taxes were spent, how decisions were being made. And across the world, actually in 120 different countries, there are active freedom of information or access to information or right to information laws that pretty much determine citizens' capacity to understand how monies are being spent on their own behalf, how decisions are being made that are going to represent the interests of themselves, their communities, and their nation. So when we started, we really were focused on the passage of this law, and the law that had been passed in a previous administration in 2012 had never been enacted. So there was this current Freedom of Information law, but nothing had happened with it. The new administration at the time took over, and in 2016 decided that it wanted to do its own consultation and its own determination of a bill. We mobilized with about 22 different civil society or private sector groups like the Chamber of Commerce, and we put together, I think it was a collective membership of about 50,000 folks that put forward thoughts and ideas into this bill that held consultations, and then the bill was subsequently passed in 2017. That bill that act as it was passed, though, was never brought to full enactment. As that administration left and a new administration came in, there was very minimal movement. All that was done was really the repeal of the previous bill, a passage of a whistleblower's part of the legislation, and the capacity to hire an information commissioner, which is a really signature part of our law. Fundamentally, the Freedom of Information Act 2017 says that, but for some exemptions, things like national security, international relationships, things that might affect an ongoing legal case, or that would violate our Data Privacy Act and release personal information, the Bahamians should have the ability to access or request for information from the government directly from parts of government that they want and be able to get those responses back. The timeline that's in the act does speak to a time for government to respond and subsequently make a decision as to whether, based on the exemptions, it feels like it can give the information to citizens. And if that is a negative response, then citizens have the right to appeal that within the part of government that they ask the information. And if they're further denied, then they can go to this information commissioner, who really sits as an independent person to oversee the whole process and make determination of, is the release of this information still valid based on whatever exemption has been utilized, or is it more in the interest of the public to be able to release this information? And that's a really important concept because it's really reflective of best practices around this kind of law, and tells you that the law leans in the interest of the citizens. And for the Bahamas, that's a huge step forward because we're still sitting in a culture that is very opaque and does not give lots of information, and similarly can minimize the opportunity to really trust the system, understand how it reflects your interests, identify challenges if they're there. Within that space, however, though, I think we also have to recognize that there is a process. And so in that process, we're seeing delays. We're not seeing the ability for the whole of the law to be enacted over the last number of years. And that's an opportunity that I think we have to look at now.
Okay, so I feel like when we talk about FOIA, people feel like it's something up here, kind of airy-fairy. We can't really grasp it, right? Can you give an example of something that people are generally quite interested in that we could use FOIA to gain access to or learn more about?
Sure. And FOIA, really, you're right. It does seem a bit kind of in the clouds, but it is very direct to your day-to-day. It could be an issue of health issues that come up in your community you want to find out. It could be the status of a project that is happening at your local school or in your community. It could be a development that's been brought forward that represents a potential environmental challenge to your community or your island, and you want to understand what were the terms of the heads of agreement. It could be a decision that was made to say, hey, we're going to move forward on renewable energy, or we're going to make sure we protect the seabeds, the seagrass beds, and this is the kind of research that we use to make that determination. So it really allows folks to be able to have a better, clear, and more direct understanding of how government's decision making is whether it's sound, whether it's not. We're kind of in a time where the political back and forth is almost overwhelming, right? It's so prevalent, and let's even take it for in the best possible way. Let's say each party just firmly believes they really alone can make the solution to providing the sustainability of the Bahamas future. Well, the fervor that's going back and forth between the two main parties and any other subsequent parties almost relies upon this concept of trust us, and what we say is right. And the world is a little different now than it was maybe a number of years ago, and people want to have a better ability to look and understand and make their own determination. Do I trust that? Do I believe that it is correct, or that information does present an accurate picture of what's happening or what's going on? And so I think, given that it's such a time of skepticism, such a time of misinformation that comes through all different sources, it's really important to provide access to folks being able to get a look at the information that government uses on its own. I also think it's a flip side in that it's really important for government at this point, because there are new things that have happened, innovative programs in this administration or the last, that have been put forward with the assumption that folks will see this and be excited and move forward and better their experiences or their quality of life. And folks still are not moving towards those solutions because of this lack of trust, or this lack of understanding exactly how and what is being done on their behalf. So I think it's crucial. And then a final takeaway, I think, is there's just having an active Freedom of Information Act helps the environment, helps both the social and the economic environment. In social ways, it ensures that government knows that the decisions it's make could be looked at with lots of scrutiny. So it tends to lead to, in research, more effective and efficient policy making, more effective and efficient government spending. On the other side, though, it also builds levels of trust in our system. So if you're that small business person, or you've got a small informal business, this reinforces that, okay, it's worth it for me to make my investment, to make that business a little bit more, or start up a new business, because the system is more fair and I do have the ability to understand if it's been used inappropriately or how monies or information has been put forward in a clear and concise way.
Okay, so could we use the Freedom of Information Act to find out, for example, who owns the building that the government is renting for XYZ ministry or department?
Yes, you could. There wouldn't be an exemption under that unless it was for some reason being leased by, it was owned by another country, say the China State Construction owned it or something, because that is one of the exemptions. But absolutely, you'd be able to find out those types of things, which historically have been really unclear, and determine that. And it's really not about just like paperwork. It's about ultimately fairness and equity. It's you understanding how decisions are made and public funds are spent. It could be supporting human rights or advocacy efforts, push for equality, because it's going to ensure that you have transparent access to the data, so that if you can identify, like, here's the issues, we're seeing a number of things that are coming up as a trend, we're going to have a better sense versus the anecdotal information that a lot of times we'll utilize. And fully, we underreport a lot of things because information is held in lots of different spaces and it's not easily accessed. So this could really help folks in communities to advocate for their interests, to better understand the circumstances, and then devise interventions or requests that are suitable to create positive change.
We talk a lot about work that has been done, consultancies that the government has paid for, and the research, the papers, the recommendations that have been produced that don't seem to go anywhere. We know of many, many documents, many recommendations, pieces of research that are just sort of sitting on a shelf somewhere. Could we use this to unearth some of that knowledge?
Theoretically, yes. And that's part of why we're advocating for the movement on this too, because in every instance, when freedom of information is brought forward, there goes through this time of determination. How is it working? What needs to happen? How does the information get brought forward? Because there is the capacity to say, give information that might be redacted or might be partial information. So when we think about how we can access the information, a part of it then becomes it's a reactive process. We have to know what we're going to ask, right? This isn't just a blanket, the file is open and here you go. It's that you have to specifically identify and say, here's what I want to know, and here's where I can find that information, and then make a specific request to that part of government, and then get response back, which could be partial or denied based on one of those exemptions. So there is an importance to understanding the process. And we've spent the last number of months going out into the community, holding both virtual and in-person educational sessions to try and let folks understand what this law is about. And as in everything, it's actually best if you find out the information. So we've put it on our website. There's a Freedom of Information resource hub where there's frequently asked questions. There is the actual law. You can look at it yourself. You can also understand where we are in the status of the law, that a lot has been done, but we're still a bit far off from having an act that can be utilized, and also some tools about how you yourself can get involved and push for this law to be fully enacted and funded. Interestingly, we're having this conversation right as the Prime Minister has finished his budget communication. And during this next number of weeks, there are going to be fervent debates back and forth from both sides, the government and opposition, and now even the third party, about what they think the government should be doing. It's crucially important that those folks that are debating on your behalf hear from you. And if this is something that you feel that is important for them to consider, this is the time to make sure that you to write a letter or an email that would express your interest around moving this piece of legislation forward, so that Bahamians can achieve and receive the benefits that come with it.
And in your conversations with people in the community, what are some of the issues or the areas that they have curiosity around that they're looking forward to using FOIA on?
Well, we really wanted to make sure that as we went out there that we weren't just having a Nassau-centric conversation. So we've been to a number of different islands. I think we've been to 5, 6 islands all told and had these conversations. And a lot of them are really day-to-day quality of life. How are the roads being kept up? What in some of the island communities, they have a lot of concerns about the upkeep of the environment or the impact of a development or a development that has been promised and never came forward. Folks want to know that there's a fair system. There's a lot of information that folks have about contracts that government have presented. And we do have the Procurement Act, and there is a procurement website now that's starting to report out those contracts. But there still is a lot of concern and skepticism about what comes from that. So more transparency builds more access to information, builds an ability for folks to make a critical decision about whether they like or don't like what's happening on their behalf. Folks may not even necessarily be able to call it freedom of information, but what they're saying in almost every conversation we've had is they want a fair system and they want equality and they want the access for them to be able to further their interests or the interests of their family or their communities in a way that is not biased or based on political affiliation or even perceived political affiliation.
And you mentioned that a lot of information about FOIA and how it works is on your website. Can you give us the URL? What's the easiest way for people to access that information?
Sure. Best thing is just to go to orgbahamas.com, and you'll see in the navigation bar a little tab that says FOIA, F-O-I-A, Resource Hub. And that will, you can also Google ORG and FOIA. This will come up. Or check it out through our Facebook or our Instagram or LinkedIn profiles, where you'll get access to that. And on that information, and we tried to really make sure that it was usable, that it was accessible. We went through a number of beta tests with folks in the community so that they made sense, so that they could make sense of this information and use it. And what's exciting is we've started to see folks using the tool. You're able to put a little bit of information into this tool, your name, your constituency, choose a few items that you might think are important about FOIA, and then also even personalize it. So you can put forward why you think this is important, or why it impacts you or your community. And what we'll do with the tool is we then send you an email that has the email of your representative. It gives you the draft of the email, so you can even further personalize it. And you can go ahead and send it directly from your email to them so that it's not perceived as anything political or as if ORG is trying to push you into any scenario. We do ask that folks would CC us so that we would understand and know and can kind of tabulate all of the work that's been done. But more importantly, it also facilitates now this two-way dialogue, which is so important, that those folks that have been elected to represent you, you need to know that they've heard you, that they're pushing for your interests. And what we've seen even more exciting is we've seen some of the responses coming back from the MPs. And folks have started to have a much more robust dialogue, which maybe may start around freedom of information, but it might go into other areas like education or health or how the investment in the community is going to be done from government side. And that's really what we want to foster, because that kind of social contract, that mutual responsibility that exists between the citizens and the government is something that if we can strengthen that, I think a lot more potential work can happen through leveraging community strength, community interest, and those in government's level of representation.
Yeah, a lot of the communication with government is very one way. We are sort of in this situation where it's kind of like we're at the bottom as citizens, right? And we're not really seeing ourselves as being the power holders and rights holders and the employers of these people that have been elected to be our representatives, right? They're representatives, not necessarily leaders, although we frame them as leaders. And it's great to create spaces where people can come together and come up with ideas and figure out what our demands are. Sometimes we need to be in conversation about the issues to really identify those issues and then be able to say very clearly, no, we want we want FOIA. We want to be able to ask these questions, make these requests, and know that they're going to be actioned, and know that there is an independent body that's going to be able to look at this. And this is one of the ways that ORG is very interesting to us at Equality Bahamas, because as you know, we are also looking at the ways that democracy is used and misused, right? And we're not using it to its full potential in a lot of ways. And even as we work toward expanding rights and making sure that we all have access to our human rights, we know that we have to be engaged in this democratic process. And it's why we have our Feminist Standards for Governance workshops coming up. And folks, if you're hearing about that for the first time, you can go to tiny.cc/feminist standards, or check out the most recent video on the Equality Bahamas Instagram to find out more about how you can join us in identifying issues, but more importantly, working toward making very clear recommendations or demands so that ahead of the next general election, we have a people's agenda. We're not waiting for the FNM to give us a manifesto or the PLP to give us a charter for governance. We are charting the path for 2026 to 2031, and FOIA can absolutely be a part of that, but hopefully we get where we need to be before the next general election, right, Matt? Like there's a reason that this is all happening right now. We're kind of trying to fit energy. Can you explain a little bit about the timing, and then also some more actions that you want to see people take?
Sure, and I think I mean, the work that you're doing is so powerful and important, because across the world, it's seen and recognized that when policies have the proactive input of those that are most affected, they're going to be more effective. They're going to be they're going to achieve what the ultimate intention is. You know, a lot of times things are passed on the behalf of folks, and then you spend all this time trying to convince them that this is the way. We saw that with the gender-based violence bill, which had years of traction and movement. And people, were told they were heard, and what came out on the other side was not representative of the interests, and that doesn't help us move forward in any way. It wastes opportunity and energy that we have in our community. We're at a time, really interestingly, as you said, that an election is coming up. There's a lot that we need to do to prepare, not just in the government side, but much more importantly in our communities. The last election, which was a little bit of an anomaly. We know historically we've seen election numbers in the Bahamas be in the low 90% of the electorate coming out, or the high 80%. It dropped down to the mid 60s. And that's significant because it had a lot of reasons. It could have been the post-COVID environment and health concerns. It could have been that we've now moved to a permanent registry, which takes away kind of the psychological and the social reinforcement of putting your thumb in the black and showing everybody beforehand, because now it's left up to your day-to-day decision, and that means you have a little less social accountability with that. It also was related to the SNAP election, which a lot of youth did not really appreciate and felt quite disenfranchised and left out of the process. Add to that, we're in a time where globally, and definitely in our region, and absolutely in the Bahamas, there's low trust in not only government, but lots of the larger institutions, not-for-profits like ours, or banks, or media, or even churches. This is not a time where folks are seeing big entities as being really representative of their direct interests. So what we don't want is the response of that is to step away and not be involved. And the election is a major opportunity for that. So I think we have to think about tools like our FOIA advocacy tool, think about frameworks like the Feminist Framework for Governance, and the opportunities to listen and be a part of that. You've had some of the thematic issues around your Women's Wednesdays, and we are out in the community teaching folks to better understand how the government funding services or how government runs through our freedom schools. A lot of this work is really prepping folks to play that critical role during the election of making a critical decision. We've seen the last two elections go in majority wins. And in many ways, you could probably intuit that is not necessarily pushing a new group in as much as pushing the old group out. And we want folks to think and advocate for the things that are making a difference in their communities, whether they be environmental programs or youth development or programs that are highlighting education or preserving or bettering folks' health. The things that make a difference and move forward shouldn't be dependent upon one agenda or another, one political party or another. They are based on what works in a certain community, what has buy-in, what has input of those communities. So we want to make sure that the election reflects just that. So a people's agenda is great. I mean, right? Think about the power of somebody showing up to your house trying to get your vote, and you already have a list of what you want them to do, not the shiny new mantra of a party that says this is what we're going to do, but has challenges in actually achieving those things, either because it's not realistic or that's not really their particular agenda. We need to move forward from that, because each time we change administrations, there's so much momentum that gets lost. There's so many things that started and don't move forward. And we don't have exhaustive resources. We don't have exhaustive money to throw at these things, and we're losing time. So it's absolutely crucial that we help folks to be a more active role in this process, and recognize that for decades, the message has been sit small and we'll take care of you. And we have to change that concept. We have to change that ability so that we build those civic muscles to a point where they feel comfortable lifting and being involved and making the hard decisions that are going to come forward for our future.
Absolutely. And also getting it across to people that you don't have to have a PhD or a master's or a bachelor's, right? To be able to participate, to have
or a law degree. You definitely don't need a law degree.
No degree. You don't need any degree, right? You are living here, and just by virtue of being here and being aware of the news and having those conversations with coworkers and family members, you have a sense of what's going on. You know what your struggles are every day. And by having those conversations with the people around you, or with the folks at ORG, or the people at Equality Bahamas, or any other NGO that you're engaging with, it can kind of help you to connect the dots between all of the different things that we're dealing with, and some issues that are really governance issues, systemic issues. And there's a way that the media, and I don't mean just like local media houses, I mean the media in general, what we read, what we watch on television, can kind of convince us that our circumstances are a result of something that we did or failed to do. But there are systemic issues here. There's information that we don't have access to, right? We're out here guessing at what's happened, what's going on, how is money being used. And many people use their guesses and present them like facts to confuse everyone else about what's going on, right? And they kind of, we have people who get paid to spin. They get paid to spin stories and make us believe certain things so that we can vote in a certain way. But if we have access to the information, there's a knowledge there that can combine with our lived experiences and our opinions and what we believe to be necessary and what we hold as values, that can help us to set our own agenda.
Right.
For
and
there's
this
next 5 years. Mm-hmm.
No, there's this expectation of quick and fast. Something happens, something happens in Adelaide. I want to know 5 minutes later. We're getting those videos of, God forbid, somebody just got shot, and you're seeing it right afterwards. And so we've reinforced this dynamic that these things have to happen quickly, but it doesn't give us a chance to, as you say, really better understand what's going on and create that space for us to make our own determination of it. We also need to work on people understanding the systems that are challenging, right? Though that mechanism of work on your own and make it through based on your own merit and follow a very charismatic leader. These are things that are built into almost every part of our system. And we have to think about the fact that there is opportunity for collective action. There is opportunity for sharing and working collaboratively. In addition to the work we do on policy and citizen engagement and kind of facilitating this two-way dialogue, we do a lot of work on helping not-for-profit organizations and faith-based organizations to build their capacity, because it's really powerful when folks work in like-minded spaces And the perception that change can only happen through what government of the day decides is the way to go is really a fallacy. It doesn't hold up. There's so much work that's happening, maybe in smaller ways in our community, through these not-for-profit organizations, through community groups, through advocacy groups, and work through groups like Equality Bahamas and so many others that are out there addressing the environment or addressing child development or helping us to reduce the crime or open up business opportunities that are out there. But we're just not seeing the opportunity to connect these and realize the potential of change that exists. Because that change is not going to happen quickly. It's not going to respond in the way that the social media feed will give you something every 30 seconds. It's going to happen through ongoing and consistent work. And it's only going to happen, to your point, if we understand the system, if we recognize the flaws and the opportunities, that we push for something that doesn't create just opportunities for a few and then wait for things to trickle down, but that we create more inclusive and accountable scenarios. We look at looking at the roles of gender, looking at the roles of women, both in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. And there's this obvious inequity that everyone knows and talks about. At the same time, the movement towards change has taken a really long time. And that is not reflective of the potential power that sits in our community. There's a lot of work to be done to fight for rights, whether it be gender rights, disability rights, senior rights, climate justice rights, debt rights. I mean, there's all of these issues have compounded to a point where it can become quite overwhelming. And the work to get out of that is going to take consistent work. And if every 5 years a government switches, then the most sustainable groups that can work on those are going to be the not-for-profits, are going to be the churches and faith-based groups, are going to be the groups that are in our communities that are there to stay. So we need to really help individuals in our communities connect with these groups, make sure those groups are run professionally and legitimately, make sure that they are doing the right work to advocate and push the important voices that need to be heard in our communities to the front. And then facilitate that when those voices are put forward, that there are representatives in place that can listen and hear and respond to them. So that's not a quick fix, but it is one that if we can do that, a lot can come from that, and a lot of positive change for a lot more folks, I think, is in the works.
Absolutely. And there are two things to balance here, right? Like, there are actions that we need to take now, today, things that we need to do to move us forward. And we also have to hold that what we do today, we might not see the benefit literally tomorrow, right?
Right.
There are a couple of steps that we have to take, and it can be a long road, but that's not to say that we won't reap any of the rewards of the work that we're doing. For example, what we're doing at Equality Bahamas is very long-term work, because it's not just about changing laws and policies. It's actually changing behavior. It's changing society in the way that we've designed it. So we have to accept that we might not get to experience the world that we're trying to create, right? But what you're talking about with FOIA, these are things that we can actually see the reward. We can actually benefit from the changes that are being made, and that can contribute to some of the longer term work that organizations like Equality Bahamas is doing. So it's just something to keep in mind. We want to be living in reality while we're imagining something better, right? We know that there's a better future out there. There's a world that we're creating together.
But it's also really important that we remind ourselves that by doing the work, right? Think about the civic voice that pushed for independence or majority rules or suffrage. That was some strong pushing against some very, major colonial forces that have been in place for hundreds of years. And the push was not quick. It was sustained, but those muscles have not been as strong, or if they are, they're not necessarily being used in a way that it can be formally recognized. Think of how valuable talk radio is in our community. Everyone who's calling in and giving those voices aren't necessarily going collectively to do a thing. How often we're putting our thoughts and ideas into WhatsApp chats that, again, it's great for others to recognize it and create a dialogue, but where is that going? So we have to reestablish that these channels of interest are being moved forward in a way that's meaningful. And so we've advocated for a while about more standardized public consultation mechanisms, Lots of places have things in place where when a new law is coming forward, there's maybe a green paper that goes forward to people who are a little more technically involved. And then once they've determined a direction, a white paper or some website where you can get more information and have your thoughts and ideas recorded in a way that those who are making these decisions have that input. We see often here, because of the majorities in both the last two administrations, that much of the debate is happening in places like cabinet, where it's confidential, appropriately so in some ways, but there might be great, robust discussions, but you don't ever see your voice being reflected in that. And then we come into the House of Assembly, one side is going to be all one way and the other side is going to be all the other way, and you're not seeing the back and forth. So we have to think about ways that we can make folks believe that their input does matter. So FOIA and the tool that we're pushing forward for letter writing and encouraging folks to go now this week to make sure that they use that is also just starting to reinforce those muscles and build those muscles and behaviors to a place that you can start to do it. You came off of, I guess was it last year that was the push towards the gender-based violence bill, and there was lots of interest. But there was only a few real points for consultation. There were maybe two or three public spaces that people could come together. Well, think about, we're in an archipelago, and so somebody who's in Inagua and in a challenging circumstance and doesn't feel like they have resources, when were they asked? When were they brought into the conversation? When were they given the opportunity to understand laws that were going to be put in place to make sure that they kept them safe? When we're seniors who are going under issues of institutional violence sometimes, when do they get involved? Folks with disabilities, like those voices that sometimes get left behind and most often get left behind are so important. And unless we build consistent and regular and proactive opportunities for those voices to be heard and recorded, unfortunately, those that are elected to represent you, no matter how well-meaning, will probably not really appropriately advocate your interests unless you're there telling them. So we've got to facilitate the capacity for folks to participate, but we've also got to make sure that the vehicles are in place and then hold those accountable who are now in positions of representation to utilize those voices and those vehicles. I think you might be muted. Sorry.
Oh, I love when that happens. We're
fill in
building
the dialogue. Whatever you think Alicia's saying, you can go ahead and fill it in.
This is a great metaphor. Sometimes we're talking and like the government isn't listening. How do we make sure that we have to unmute our mics? We have to get FOIA, get it implemented so that we can actually have our requests or our demands heard and then eventually met, right? But yes, this is a process, and we're doing multiple parts of the process at the same time. I was saying that we are kind of building this car while we're driving it.
Right.
And for some of us, we're still learning how to drive. Like we're all in different places and trying to learn different things and trying to do multiple things at the same time to move us all forward. And it's why it's so important that there are many of us doing this work. If you are in a car and you get a flat tire, it would be nice if someone is in that car who knows how to change the tire. You might be a really good driver. You might be the best driver in that car, but you cannot fix a flat or change a tire.
Yeah.
It takes all of us, and we're going to have different perspectives, different ideas, different priorities as well, right? We'll prioritize things differently. But we have to be able to come together to see all of the common issues, the struggles that we all have, and what we want as a collective, which we don't spend a lot of time doing. Figuring out what
there's rarely time for that, right? Things are happening so quickly. You're hearing every day about a new program or a new initiative or how we respond to all these external threats, inflation or cost of fuel or disasters that come our way. I think we're 6 days away from hurricane season at this point. I mean, it's just like there's so much outside of our space. And rarely, and you understand that also becomes part of the challenge for government. They're having to get these things out there so they don't get blacklisted or graylisted. But it's so important that we invest at that community level. One of the trainings you do that I've so appreciated is human rights training. And organizations like ORG or and other not-for-profits, we see our mission, we start moving forward, and we kind of do what we feel is right. And, we're using always, admittedly, a limited amount of information, a limited amount of resources. And then I remember the last time you've done it. I think I might have done it twice, but you stop and pause and reflect. Oh, by doing X, I could actually be bringing a much more positive outcome. By doing Y, I'm probably perpetuating bad things to folks unintentionally. And so that time and that intention that we need to give to see folks in our community is so important, because rarely in our lives do we get that chance. Some information is brought to you when you're in the education system. A lot of it is not. And all of a sudden you're put into a world where you're expected to somehow be able to, miraculously understand it all, be a part of it, fight for your own interests, as well as somehow, support the collective effort. It is not an easy thing, and it requires work and support and help. We actually put a lot of information out on our website so that folks can utilize that. We have things like an advocacy toolkit or other types of resources. But folks have to even understand that that's something that might help them. If I'm struggling and I don't have a job and I'm not sure if I can afford the bills this week, and all of a sudden my power just went out and XYZ, deciding that freedom of information is the thing I want to fight for is probably not my first thought. I have to kind of be able to help that concept that, oh, my voice can make a difference. And some of our work in our active citizens trainings are really just about helping people to understand that they have a potential to be able to have an impact in their community. Cleaning up, being a part of a group, working and supporting others, that their acts can benefit or have a negative impact on others. And sometimes that's the beginning place that we have to start. Hopefully some folks are motivated and want to go out and are right now thinking about how they can reach out to their representative before they debate in the House on the budget. But a lot of us probably are just getting started on how do I better my own circumstances, rather than waiting to see if someone in a position of elected power can make that better for us.
Yeah. We have expectations, we have demands that are all reasonable of our representatives, and we have a responsibility ourselves to pay attention to what's going on, to have these conversations with each other, and to participate in the setting of the agenda, considering not just our individual circumstances, but the collective. So before we go, tell us again where we can get more information about FOIA, and then the specific steps that you want people to take. And also, just to be very clear, very transparent, how long it's going to take them to do the thing that you want them to do.
Sure. So the Freedom of Information Act has been brought forward with regulations that have been drafted and an implementation plan that probably will run about the course of a year if it's allowed to go forward. The budget for that was established at about $1 million. The last 2 years, government has given $140,000 to be able to cover that. And obviously that's not sufficient. So there hasn't been a lot of movement. So the hope is that they put full funding in this year and move forward those regulations so that this can happen. So what can you do? We want you to go to Freedom of Information. We want you to go to ORG Bahamas, check out our Freedom of Information Resource Hub. We want you to utilize the tool that will allow you to put together a professional and respectful letter that advocates your interest on freedom of information. We're going to send that back to you. You're going to send it directly to your MP or your minister or your senator, if you really like an appointed senator, and you're going to let them know what you think and want. CC us at Citizens at ORG Bahamas so that we know, and keep coming back to us. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram at ORG Bahamas so that you can find out how this work is continuing to move forward, whether something came out of the budget, what needs to happen if it did, and where we can go on that. It is going to be longer term work, but your ongoing involvement and understanding is crucial. We say get informed and get involved, and it's a simple way to say it, but it means being active and engaged.
Awesome. So let's see what we can do to get FOIA to be a real thing, something that we're just not talking about and throwing the word around and the acronym around, but something that we can actually use to get the information that we need to understand what's going on, to deal with corruption. I think it's going to go a long way in
I think so.
corruption. and being able to have an evidence base for some of our advocacy and for the things that we're demanding as citizens and as residents of the Bahamas. So be sure to check out the ORG website to get more information, send those letters in. You know, our politicians aren't really used to hearing from us in that way. So let's shake things up a little bit and send those letters out. And also, just as a reminder, the Feminist Standards for Governance workshops are coming up. We start with Women's Wednesdays next week. That's Wednesday, June 4th at 6 o'clock. Join us at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. We're starting with, I believe health is one of the first thematic areas. It's always an interesting one because we can talk about pregnancy, we can talk about maternity leave, we can talk about non-communicable diseases, we can talk about the environmental factors that affect our health and well-being, mental health, the increase in suicide. So many things can come up. We can talk about issues that are related to health and come up with some really clear recommendations. It's a great process. It's a really challenging way, I think, to talk about issues. It really pushes you to think about the root causes. And it's a little bit of an innovation process. So you kind of gain a new skill as you contribute to the People's Agenda for 2026 to 2031. Get more information at tiny.cc/feminist standards. And Matt, tell us one more time, the org website.
Go to orgbahamas.com or check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at ORG Bahamas Foundation.
It's org, O-R-G, like Organization for Responsible Governance. Thank you so much, Matt, for being in this conversation with me and talking a little bit about FOIA. Like I said, I think we hear about it all the time, but do we really know what it means? So after this, I think more people have a handle on it. And I know that they're ready to go to the website and send out these emails to their representatives. And hopefully we'll see some of them at the Feminist Standards for Governance workshop coming up. Thanks for joining everyone who's watching live. For those who are watching the recording, great job. You stuck it out 46 minutes. Pat yourself on the back. And enjoy the rest of the day, everybody.
Thanks so much. Have a great time.